welcome everybody joining. This is our first webinar of 2022, everyone. Very exciting. It's great to be back, and actually we're back and bigger this time, bigger and better, as we're joined not just in discussion in the room today, but out there in the social sphere. We're live streaming to LinkedIn, so let's just hope the tech stands up. For those of you who have attended these events before, welcome back. It's been a while. For those of you who haven't, my name's Jamie, and I'm the Business Development Director here at Tribal Worldwide. Again, for those of you who are joining the first time or just simply don't know who we are, won't take any offence, just a quick intro to Tribal. So we've been innovating digitally since 1995, believe it or not. And today we deliver total experiences across the end-to-end connected customer journey for our clients. And we do this through expert delivery from our dedicated technology, data, customer experience, creative, consultancy and innovation departments. So made up of 6 what we call practices. But today we're focusing on 2 of those practices, which is customer experience and data. And over the next hour, we're going to really sort of try to explore sort of 3 key threads of conversation. Sort of why CX and data need to be working together to help brands build for the future. The shift in focus from buying behaviors to intention and emotion, and the importance of using data to inform human experiences. And look, we really want you all to get as much from this as possible. So for those here on Zoom, the chat box is open, and as well as the direct Q&A. And for those of you watching on LinkedIn, please submit your questions in the comments section, and our moderator will get them to us. So throughout the chat, please fire over any questions you may have, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can. Also, we're recording this webinar, so if for any reason you need to drop off or you just simply want to share this with colleagues after the fact, then look out for this being published shortly. But that's enough from me for now. I just want to sort of go around around the room and have a quick sort of round of introductions. James, starting with you first, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. I'm James. I'm the user experience lead at London North Eastern Railway. Before that, I was working at Avanti and Virgin Trains and a Dragon's Den startup. And I'll hand over to Shorful.
Thanks, James. Hi, I'm Shorful. I am the Chief Data Scientist and I lead the data science practice at Tribal. So anything to do with data, I'm the person and I have the team for it.
And hi, I'm Yasmin. I look after the CX practice at Tribal, and our team is dedicated to creating those meaningful experiences and just making sure that our clients are having that human first approach and holistic view of total experience. And I'm super excited because we really love investigation and data being part of the creative process. So this is great.
Absolutely. So this is a good start. We're ahead of schedule. So nice quick round of introductions, which leaves me an extra couple of minutes to come to you, Shorful, to really kick us off on things, to be honest. So I'm going to start by asking a pretty big and fairly direct question, to be honest with you, which is, and of course, keen to get Yasmin and James, your points of view on this as well. But Shorful, firstly, do you think the relationship between customer experience and data is thriving or failing at the moment? Because of course, there's been a lot of change in this space over the last 24 months.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question. I think one of the things that from the outside, it looks like that CX and data are in a good relationship. Data is being used to drive customer experiences and customer experience requests of data to make sure that they can do a better job. But from a data perspective, I don't think it's actually a functional relationship. I think it's become very transactional. So, and what's happened is that where things have been very data focused or data led or data driven, we've ended up in situations where customer experience have been optimized. So we don't build we don't use data for customer experience, we actually use data for optimization. And so what we do is we see a customer and just want them to get from A to B as efficiently as possible, ignoring the experience that they might have in that journey of getting from A to B. So to answer your question in a broad way, I think from the outside it looks like that CX and data are working together. Personally, I think it's a dysfunctional relationship where data is really just driving what a lot of people want, which is optimization, not experience.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just to try and do a bit of marriage counselling here, Yasmin, if it's a dysfunctional relationship, what's your perspective on that?
So I think Shorful is completely right in what's happening, but I also, and maybe this is me being that positive person, I also think it's thriving just because the possibilities of what we can imagine when we combine CX and data are endless. And today's technology can capture like data about our routines, our cultural cues, what we like, what we don't like. Being a designer has never been so exciting, and it's because today we're not just persuading people, we're driving that real value. So when we actually do have the perfect marriage, it's amazing and it's thriving. But I think Shorful's right, there's a lot of work to be done to have the majority of brands working that way.
And James, I know you often sit at that intersection of data and CX, so I guess you could kind of be that neutral party. Where do you what's been your experience of that in recent times?
I think it's a really, really good topic, because realistically, it sounds like it's a get out of jail free card, but what do we mean by data and what do we mean by CX, right? So data is essentially sort of ones and zeros. It can exemplify what people's sort of biases are, what people like, what people don't like, where the psychology is and all that kind of thing, or it can exemplify stuff which is more transactional in terms of, yes, somebody is converted. I like to think of an example whenever we think about optimization as sort of that paradigm, because there has been a massive emphasis and people say, oh, make it like Uber or make it like, I don't know, Google or something like that, which obviously they've done a bunch of user testing around their particular users, their target demographic, their particular solution and the problem they're trying to fix. So it's not as easy as to lift and shift. But for example, if you were designing a mortgage app or something like that within banking, it's not good enough to just get people through the stage quickly. If you're going to put 100, 200, 300, 400,000 pounds against your name, from a liability perspective, you want reassurance, you want security, you want that communicated through the experience. So it's not good enough to just say, dwell time was 10 seconds on this page, sweet, great, conversion's been up kind of thing. So I think it's important to look at it in totality. I totally agree with what's been said.
Interesting. And then, so Shorful, sort of coming back to you, obviously, if you feel that perhaps there's work to be done between that relationship, what's really the focus on data today then that's going to help drive that relationship forward, I suppose? Where do you find yourself operating with clients at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, if you imagine, again, from a data point of view, and Yasmin and James may have a different perspective, but we look at the data as just a representation of behaviors, right? So we go X number of people landed on the website or used the app, they spent this long, some of them went to these pages, some of them converted, some of them did what we wanted them to do, whether that's a transaction or generate a lead, and we just see the behavior. And what I think is missing from the data side of view, which is I think we need to get closer to CX from data. I think CX tries to get close to us, but I think as data people, we are a bit distant. I think we need to get closer to CX in understanding what is the intent and motivation. So if we look at that data, what do we think the intent and motivation is of people doing stuff on our website or doing stuff on our digital properties? When someone comes to our website and spends, let's say 2-3 minutes, is that good engagement? Is that bad engagement? Can we infer anything from the types of behavior they do? A 10 minutes of someone slowly scrolling for a very long article could be positive, but someone spending 10 minutes zooming around an article or zooming around a page could be really bad, because they're probably looking for something that they can't find and they're scrolling. It's a bit like if you take the physical experiences, someone coming to a supermarket and casually browsing around and leaving half an hour later, even with one item, could be a positive experience, whereas someone coming and darting between aisles and going backwards and forwards and retracing themselves could be a bad one, because they've not found what they want, and at the end they both walk out with one item, but they've had two different experiences. So for me, the thing that we as data data people need to get better at, and to work closely with the CX people, is try to infer some intent and motivation. I think that is the sort of next step that the data analytics community needs to start working from on that basis, so that what happens is that when we look at these experiences, we don't just group people as one big homogenous group. We start to think about them as discrete and different groups.
Definitely. And Yasmin, I know you do a lot of work around kind of understanding those different audience demographics, and sort of I know that you and I have spoken before about some particularly good case studies around the need to sometimes create frictionless customer journeys, and the need sometimes for friction, and and understanding when to dial that up and to dial that down. I mean, so how would you sort of take that beyond sort of what the data is telling you, and actually then go on to applying that within the customer journey?
Yeah, and I think, I just love hearing how Shorful talks about it, because it just gets me excited, because data, as James has said, is a really broad term, and data gives us really powerful insights into customers and their behaviors, but it doesn't tell us how they are, or what they care about, or how they expect brands to behave, or how they feel. So those questions can only be answered through one-to-one conversations, or on-site observations of customers, or focus groups. And that's why directly interacting with your customers to dig deeper and really get to know them is key, and it helps us to define the customer journey. However, customers don't always know what they want, right? So, and they don't know how sometimes to express themselves, and therefore we need to combine that kind of more qualitative data and that quantitative data from surveys and polls is just as important. But the combination of all of that, and that's why customer data must be seen as a strategic kind of element, is that the combination of all of that really makes more stronger relationships and more meaningful connections with customers.
Yeah, no, and so I mean, on that then, I guess, so the open question to the forum, or I suppose it might sort of land more on Shorful, but what then is the difference between sort of being data driven and data informed, do you think? Especially when it comes to kind of using the right data to interpret intent and motivation, and how to reflect this in the customer journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that I think the industry needs to sort of realize what they're saying. So when you say you're data driven, you're actually saying at the expense of everything else. We're driven by the data, and the thing that we take away is us as humans. Don't forget, we are not machines. We don't design machines. We're not machines that design machines for humans. We are humans that design technologies and experiences for other humans. Okay, so why are we taking that element out? And so I always go back to how the brain works. Okay, as humans, okay, we process a lot of information, and then what happens, that information distills itself as feelings and stuff, which is why we can react really fast to things. Otherwise, if as humans we were always analyzing every data point, we'd probably be eaten. Our ancestors would have been eaten by the lions a long time ago. It's just that we get a gut feeling that if you see something like that that's snarling at you, run, right? Okay, so again, what we need to start talking about is data informed. Okay, so yes, data is important. It tells us a lot about history, because that's what data technically is. No matter how much predictive modeling, I work in this space, it relies on replicating history. Okay, so yes, data is important, and it can potentially drive information, but it should really inform. It should inform how we then decide what decision to make, and that informed should be married with things like understanding people, and I guess that's where Yasmin does a lot of bringing all that sort of research and observation and even ethnographic studies into it, but also the knowledge we have of the world. Okay, if we want someone to buy a particular item, like as James mentioned, you sort of say we can shift and lift, but selling, Amazon selling books compared to Volkswagen selling cars are two different things. Yes, the behavior is the same. Someone comes to your digital asset, potentially a website, they go through some steps, they pay, and they walk away with, or get an item delivered or go and collect it. But they're two fundamentally different things. And we've got to understand, as humans, they're not going to have the same motivations, the same feelings as they're going through those processes. So, I'd like us to, as a community, start saying, yes, data's good. And again, from a data perspective, this is what I do, but data's one component of it. We shouldn't rely on just the data to make the decision. I mean, James, in the real world, how do you sort of encounter that?
I think it's a really, really good point, and great to hear somebody with that data background say, because sometimes you come across difficult characters who might disagree with that paradigm. So I think there's three things that for me change it. So data, I mean, data you can construe anyway, right? You can make data say whatever you want. So 60% of customers want this or 40% don't want this. It's very, very different. You can look at that in a positive or a negative light. So for me, data really around that data informed as opposed to data led. It's around context. So context, I think, what's his name? Alan Kay, there's a quote that always comes to mind for me, which is like, context is worth 80 IQ points. He's the guy who created the prototype like 40 years ago for basically a tablet and a laptop. Nobody knows who he is though outside of the design community, which is quite sad. So, you know, context is really, really important, as is experience and intuition. So using an example that you said earlier, Shorful, where you know, you've got one person who's really scatty running around a supermarket. You might think, oh, that's chaos, that's really bad. Actually, they might be following their toddler who's running around, and yeah, that could be chaos, but that's not what they're actually like. It's just on that occasion that's what's happening. Or maybe they're extremely excited because there's suddenly an Aldi's opened up in their local area and they're looking at everything and they're getting really excited. So, you know, you have to utilize that element of context. You have to utilize that element of experience and intuition. So you could say, oh, okay, well, this section of the supermarket is really cold. So maybe she got there, she thought she was really cold. She went over here and she went to get herself a jumper or something like that, and then went back to it, kind of thing. So I think it's really important to look at, you know, take a step back, look at the big picture. Otherwise you get far too narrow and it just becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you get maybe incremental changes on paper, but not exponential changes, which are transformative, really.
It's really interesting, yeah. And I think sort of on that as well, you've seen, so we've spoken a little bit there around sort of qual and quant and sort of how we kind of look at data. I'd like to sort of move on now to a little bit about sort of how we actually kind of collect that data, I suppose. And sort of, I guess, Yasmin, sort of coming to you on that, you know, I think that sort of that sort of transaction of data, you know, with our customers is becoming increasingly complex, and there's obviously a lot of changes happening in that industry at the moment. And I know that you're really passionate about the fact that sort of giving data shouldn't sort of only be tactical or transactional. Tell us a little bit about sort of how you sort of support that from a customer experience perspective, and you know, where you think that should be going as far as the kind of value exchange is concerned.
Yeah, no, that's it's such a great question, because I think that still a lot of times we see a lot of you know, transactional functional needs being met, but not the emotional ones. And I think that's where I kind of like to start, is that, you know, we as humans are very multi-layered. And I think brands sometimes, you know, run quite quickly to answer functional needs, but forget about the emotional needs. And we have to understand both types, you know, and then what they also need to do is just ensure that there is a focus on those emotional needs. The emotional needs are where we unlock people's, you know, multi-layered self, where we understand things about them, where we understand what's happening in their lives, just like the example, you know, that James just gave. We understand their motivations, we understand their pain points, and we understand this across the whole journey. And we then also understand that every journey isn't the same. So I think one of the most important things is that just understanding that the functional needs also need to be met by the emotional needs. And when brands, you know, focus there, then we create this really interesting space that we're actually solving for right problems. And then we're responding to their needs instead of, you know, just kind of business needs.
Definitely. Anything to add there, Shorful?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask Yasmin actually a question, because, you know, when, well, especially when my team, when we're asked to sort of set business objectives, you know, it's all KPI driven, okay? And you can see, you know, if you've been in these workshops, the KPIs are always listed as hard metrics, right? So sales, revenue, number of leads, a number of sales, number of people doing X, Y, Z. And, you know, I guess I've been trying to work with people to understand can we aggregate metrics, right? So from psychology, for example, when we talk about something like personality, you don't go and ask someone, are you an introvert, an extrovert, or are you this or that? We actually take sort of granular metrics that we believe are indicators of you being an introvert and being an extrovert. So some of those are behaviors, some of those are feelings. And I always wonder, we should be doing the same within our digital touch points, right? Okay, historically, yes, we probably had technical limitations. We probably had expertise, scarcity to do this space. But, nowadays, whether your physical, digital brands operate in both spaces. And I wonder, how we would tackle this, because I would like to see a scenario where, yes, we do have the top level metric, because businesses do need to make money, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be operating. But I think, as Amazon has shown with their relentless focus on customer experience, that if you do customer experience, then it does lead to more sales. And Forrest has shown that the CX score, or Gartner, I can't remember which one, who shows that CX score is correlated very well with share price. So clearly customer experience has a huge impact on revenue. And so, I've been trying to work out ways of how we could take knowledge that we know from psychology and aggregate metrics, whether it's a summation. So if they do X, Y, Z, then they are happy. If they do X, Y, Z, they're sad, right? Or, more statistical modeling, which is, what we used to traditionally do, to say, if we take all these metrics, then we can say someone's engaged, right? If we take all these metrics, we can say someone's, got a toddler, So it's those kind of things that I think needs to happen in that evolution of when we talk about setting KPIs. And it has been interesting because I've worked with quite a few sort of organizations looking at setting KPIs. And when I go down that route, the thing I think is lacking is the CX representation, because I don't think anyone sees CX having a functional role when you're setting business metrics, and I wonder whether, unless the customer voice is represented in those meetings, in those workshops, whether we're always going to stick to the data people jotting down the actual hard number, or going away, putting it in a tag or whatever we do, and then measuring it.
Yeah, and Shilpa, it's so interesting because, I think we have a lot of these discussions, especially I think in the CX world, is that there's been such a shift and change, where everybody in every organization says that they're customer centric, and, they're customer centric focused, or they're human first focused. And yes, there are departments and groups that within that organization are focused on that. But unfortunately, till it's, the organizations that are doing well, like you said, at the top, CX isn't something that sits on the sidelines. It is something that is, across the board. And that goes to data as well. Data isn't just kept in silos. So at the top level, you are not just looking at business objectives, you're looking at customer objectives as well. And I think that you're right. If you're not having those discussions in those meetings, and if people aren't seeing the relationship between the business needs as well as the customer needs, as well as in a lot of cases now, even moving to societal needs, they're not going to make the change that's necessary for today or tomorrow. And it's really great when you do meet those kind of CEOs, or you meet those kind of brands that have a focus across the board, because it does change. And that's why I sometimes have a really hard time saying, even in the business we're in, that, oh, I look after the CX practice, because yes, I do. But CX is not just me. I mean, I couldn't do CX with you or without Darren strategy and Vic's, I couldn't do my job if I just did it by myself, and nor could the team. And I think organizations are still working that way, and we're working hard to make that changes. I will say, I think that a lot of change is being made in kind of how we demonstrate opportunities and how we then feed it back into the strategic framework. So when it comes to, emotion, and it comes to motivations, and it comes to the intent, there's tons of frameworks and tons of methodologies to use. And so it's all there. We just need to get people to start using it.
I think, Yasmin, just to add to that, I think that's really, really powerful, actually, because we have that same discussion here at LNER where people say, oh, James is in charge of UX, James will do the UX. And he's like, no. We are all responsible for the UX. So it's something that's changing. Like, we're increasingly adopting the OKR methodology that, like Intel pioneered ages ago. And that sort of gives accountability. And as long as you pop some kind of like high level metrics and key results where you identify if it's, I don't know, it could be a net promoter score, it could be lifetime value, it could be, you know, customer effort score. We've got loads of metrics within CX to help exemplify that. And again, that's a temperature check at the very top level. When you start to identify why you're not hitting that target, obviously question around how ambitious that target was, but then you drill down into the metrics underneath it to identify, oh, okay, well, these 7 metrics are all positive and then these 3 are negative. Let's dig deeper and speak to people, maybe speak to the people who are impacting and reporting on these metrics. We work with Amazon Working Services. We went over to them to have big workshop one day, which is really, really great. I was like a kid in a toy shop, you know, because it was like a design working sort of seminar. And I didn't have to lead it, which was amazing. Like, I'm so happy about that. So I was just there, like, you know, mouth on the floor, just like, yeah, give me, tell me what you guys do. And it's incredible because at Amazon, anybody in the organization, doesn't matter if you're a janitor or the CEO, anybody can create an idea and feel empowered by that idea and bring it to light. There's a lot of like big products that people are using right now, or services that Amazon have launched, which are derived from people who you would typically think of bottom of the organization and wouldn't have that power. It's giving the people the tools, the frameworks, the templates, and again, the responsibility, accountability, and the power to then action it. So they've got this whole amazing process. Look it up if you do get a chance, because when they talk about customer obsession, they really mean it. It's not a joke. They are 100% customer obsessed. It's really, really refreshing to see, you know, Amazon taking that approach.
And actually, James, whilst I've got you sort of talking about sort of LNER and your role there, you know, I when we first started talking last year, even as a commuter, you know, I was really kind of unaware of just how complex, you know, your customer experience is, you know, across web, app, third-party apps, in the station, on the platform, on the train. It's a really complex, you know, customer experience. And I know it internally as well, you've got a lot of different sort of verticals within the business that own very specific different parts of that. How have you sort of, for anyone watching today that might be operating in businesses that have similar complexities, you know, have you got any sort of advice on how you kind of drive operational effectiveness and efficiency and improve, you know, iterative improvements within your CX across such a complex journey and business as well?
Yeah, I think there's 2 bits to that really, Jamie. One of them is around making sure that you have that holistic vision. So taking into consideration the CX, the data, but then also the EX, so the employee experience too. That's very often overlooked. So we've had a massive shift in focus over the last sort of 18 months in employee experience, to making sure that we are servicing our employees first and foremost. They are our first customer. If they are not brand advocates and we're paying them to be brand advocates, how the hell do we expect, you know, Jamie who's commuting on our trains, who's paying for the sort of the luxury and the pleasure of it, to then also wax lyrical and provide that word of mouth. So I think that holistic view across the entire element is really important. At LNER and generally at rail, you know, the UK basically invented, you know, locomotives and railroads, you know, 150 years ago, 170 years ago, which is great as first mover advantage, but terrible in terms of legacy. You know, a couple leaves fall on the track and then suddenly you can't get anywhere. Sadly, without ripping up every 1,000 miles of track, it's impossible to immediately sort of countenance that. So we need to identify and be very honest as to what these legacy system parameters are and what we can do to sort of chip away at them. So it's not about saying, oh great, I can quickly slot this new product or this new service or this new interface in, without considering everybody who's impacted by it, both from a human and a systems perspective as well. So we always try to make sure that we're coming at this from a problem perspective first. So what is the person, whether it be a customer, employee, a colleague, whoever it might be, you know, another stakeholder, what is the challenge that they want, or what is it that they want to fill out? So that's very much what we're focused on here. It's around user-centered design at LNER. And it's something that's really, really exciting, because instead of saying, oh, we've got this great app, why don't we launch it? You think, no, well, actually, what is it that people want fundamentally? Do the toddler methodology, where you ask the 5 whys to get down to the bottom of actually, what is it? Oh, I want to travel to New York. I want to travel to Newcastle. I want to travel wherever. No, you don't. What is it that you're going to go there? Okay, well, I actually want to see my friends. Okay, why do you want to see my friends? I haven't seen them in ages. Okay, why haven't you seen them in ages? Okay, well, it's because, I don't know, I never get a chance to anymore. And then you start to really dig under the surface and understand fundamentally what is the human element to it, because there's always a human element to it, as Shorful said earlier. That's what it's all about, really.
And Yasmin, really glad James mentioned the employee experience there. I know this is something you're really passionate about, and you actually find yourself talking more in terms of EX than CX recently, don't you?
Yeah, and I just love to hear it, because it's something that has always been important, but it hasn't necessarily been something that is on the forefront. And I think even the acceleration, unfortunately through COVID, has even accelerated that need for employee experience and the focus on that even more so, because when you have that focus, like James had said, they are the first customer, and if you focus on them, then you'll have better experiences. And a simple example that I always love to share is Pret, and how Pret, what they did is that they encouraged their staff every week to hand out free coffees. And what they realized is by giving away drinks is better than loyalty cards. And I won't get into loyalty cards and how that, the
That's
history
a whole other
and where that is. That's a whole other. But the secret in that one interaction is that employees feel so special as they get to choose who gets the coffee and when they get it. And if you've ever been on the end of that, which I have to say, like, I didn't even know about this, even though what I do is a living. And how I first found out about it was a rainy day. I ran in for a coffee and I got a free coffee, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, are you sure? And so what's so interesting, and it's this, why I use that simple, example, and it goes across not just human touch points, it goes across, digital and physical and everything. But why I use that is I think everybody can understand that if you look at that, because of what they did to their employees, they made their employees empower them. But what they also did is made them understand what Pret stands for. And so they feel it, and so does the customer. So yeah, it's really important. And that, like James said, if you look at the CX and EX, then you get the total experience.
And just to jump in before, sorry, go on, Shorful.
No, James, please do. I've got a longer point.
I think it's a really, really good case study you've got there, Yasmin. Pret could have gone away. They could have created a multi-million-pound loyalty scheme. People would have lost cards. People would think, that's not really worth it. Now, when I have a choice between Pret and a Greggs or something like that, unless I'm hungover, I go to Pret. So, I go in and I think, even if they don't give me something, and I adapt I might adapt a little bit my personality as well. I'll be nicer to the person, because there's potentially something in it for me, but also it's just generally being a nice human being. So it's really important, because it's a symbiotic relationship at that point. You're giving employees the power, because across the board, I've seen this time and time again, the thing that leads to the highest satisfaction in terms of job satisfaction or dissatisfaction is that interaction with the customer, really. If you get a customer in there who's screaming and swearing at you, it's not going to be good. If you get somebody who's really nice coming in there, it brightens up your day. So it's really, really, really important to empower your employees through these actions, which might seem insignificant, but they make a massive difference to that person's day. Anyway, Shorful, please.
No, yeah, I was just going to pick up on that. When we talk about, obviously, like, loyalty is a different webinar, but from a customer experience point of view, right, we talk about brands wanting loyalty from customers, right? But loyalty is a human emotion. Okay, so you're asking humans to have an emotional connection to a brand that's very transactional, and all brands are. Most brands are transactional. You have to part with cash or something of monetary or something value to get something back. But that gesture, okay, makes it human. Because if you think about it, when you interact with people, yeah, some people, will only interact with you if they get something back. But then you get those nice people who, oh, can you help me find this building? I'm stuck. And they'll go, oh, come with me, I'll show you. And they'll go out of their way. They'll spend 5 minutes to walk you around the corner to show you where the building is. And that, like you said, it brightens your day. That person didn't have to do that, just like the brand didn't have to do that. You would have still bought your coffee, Yasmin, on that rainy morning. You still would have bought it. But because the brand did that, you feel how you've changed. And then also the employee, the experience of the employee also is now reflected that they're not they've got autonomy, okay? And that's what being, having a good employee experience is, that the experience has flexibility to have autonomy, because a lot of employee experiences are dictated by job descriptions and processes and schedules and rotas, and giving employees autonomy allows them the reflection of the company to be more human, I guess. The second thing I'd like to actually point out on that is it's very interesting, because we use a lot of data to improve the customer experience, okay? But a lot of the time the employees don't actually know, apart from not using it to improve the employee experience, a lot of the time the employees don't actually know what the benefit of that is. And I've worked in organizations, for example, especially with technology teams. So we've gone in and we said to the technology team, look, we need to collect this data, and because we're going to do, you know, and we need it like this, tracked like this. And the technology team look at their long JIRA list and they go, you know what? That's not going to help the product. The product needs to function if I do X, Y, Z. So they go off and they build the product, and data's right at the bottom of it. And that is not actually the technology team's fault, or even the content team where you ask them to, can you make sure you put these tags in, or even the product team who have to think about data collection. It's because we as practitioners don't inform the rest of the business how that data, you know, will improve the customer experience and therefore improve your life in knowing what to do for that customer. So we're you know, data practitioners or anybody who needs data, even CX, I guess, you know, can take the time to educate and tell other teams, you know, look, if we collected data about what a customer does here and there, yes, it's an additional technical a burden for you. What we can then eventually do is know what they're doing, and you know what, we can then make the product go in this way, or we can make the product go in this way, or we can delight customers, you know, like the Pret example. You know, I'm sure Pret is collecting customer satisfaction, some kind of NPS, and they know that's gone up, and it may not be immediate. The person who got the coffee may not say it's a good NPS, but Yasmin now telling everybody here, I now already feel positive about it.
But that's the thing, and they've been doing it, I think, since like 2015 and 2017. And I love they don't shout about it, but the impact, you know, I'm sure is huge.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to stay on this. I know we've sort of had some things to go through, but I'm just really loving the energy talking around this, because I wanted to ask a question. Do we, as a room, you know, do we feel that potentially we've gone too far? Well, not too far, sorry, but the kind of pendulums maybe swung a bit too quickly to the other side of giving customers too much choice and too much centricity almost. I'll tell you why I'm asking that, because unlike James, I was a little bit hungover last weekend, so I ended up in a McDonald's on Saturday morning, and I witnessed something really interesting, which is that there was this McDonald's, and they were completely inundated. They were completely broken because the customers that they were getting through were coming through the drive-through. They were ordering through the McDonald's app and sitting in their car in the car park for their food to be taken out. There was a queue of Deliveroo and Just Eat moped drivers. There was people ordering in the store, right? So there's so many multiple choices customers have been given to order their food there, that then on the right hand side there was a queue of customers complaining that they hadn't got their food, that they got the wrong food, that they, you know, were waiting far too long. That's an example, I suppose, of the customer experience breaking because we're giving the customer too much choice and too many options, right? So I'd like to ask the question from a CX perspective on that, but also afterwards, so from a data perspective, do we think they're maybe measuring that? Because I know you've worked with McDonald's as well. Is that an example of them not following the data, what the data is telling them of what customer experience they should be giving? But to you first, Yasmin, on that sort of case study.
Jamie, I'd love that you're bringing up this example, because this is actually happening to a lot of companies at the moment. So I had a similar kind of conversation. So when just being the person I am, I'm always looking how businesses run, and I was in Costa, and this is my like local Costa before I get on the train station where I get a coffee. And so I've known the person behind the now glass, you know, for about 2 or 3 years. And I just asked them, because she looked quite stressed. And I was just like, hey, is everything okay? Because she's used to me coming in. I was like, I got 5 minutes. Do you have time to make my coffee? And I was like, are you okay? And it was just, you know, a very quiet person normally, just let go of like, I have, you know, during COVID, we started this new process of people being able to kind of order food from us. So now local people that normally would go in are ordering food, drinks, everything on their breaks at home. And what's happened is, I'm not sure, I personally don't think it's about giving too much choice, because I think choice is what allows us to push forward and kind of really allow people to have more a personal connection with us. I think making sure that how we provide the choice has been thought about. So I don't think any of these brands at the moment have actually gone and spoke to that staff member and actually asked her about, how is your day? What is your timing like? And to start to kind of consider, it's not about taking that choice away from a delivery perspective, because one, for the business, it's really great, but for customers, it's really great too. But they haven't gone to that staff member to understand that maybe they need more staff. Maybe you can only now, due to COVID, having people in the store, let's look at when the store is busy. And let's make sure that when you pick up deliveries are only happening at a certain time. So I think the issue is more not around choice, but around not making the right decisions and not solving the problems in the right way. And again, this goes back to, it's like you pulled it all perfectly back together to where, looking, it's not just about collecting data, it's about gathering the right data. And if they would have collected the right data, they wouldn't have all of these screens, all of this stuff, it would be a different experience for everybody involved.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, don't forget, businesses have to offer these choice because other businesses are offering choices. And I think the businesses that don't do well in these, especially the bricks and mortar who are let's say digital, okay, like the banks, for example, they had that luxury. There was one bank in town, okay, and so what they would do, lunchtime would come, they let half their stuff go on lunch and they'd close half the kiosks. The problem is all people who work have lunchtime to do their banking. So they turn up at like 12 o'clock for, to do their banking. They find half of the kiosks are closed and they're queuing up, because what's happening is when customers have no choice, they're willing to put up with atrocious customer service. And you would see that in government service. I mean, not to knock .gov.uk, the government's NHS, the government's digital services are really good. If you ever do self-assessment or business stuff on there, they're really, really good. But they have that luxury. If you turn up at somewhere where you have no choice, if there was the only Costa in the whole town, okay, people would complain, but they would still turn up. And you know what the business would see? The business would say, you know what, I don't have to change anything. I still make loads and loads of money because someone's willing to wait 1 hour for their coffee and miss their train 3 times because I'm the only coffee shop in town. But this is where you are not the only player in town. There are other players, and they will evolve their business model to give customers what they want. I mean, Amazon is phenomenal. I can order something by 10 p.m. and get it by 1 p.m. It means that if I forget birthdays or anything, I mean, don't tell the world, if my wife reminds me late, I'm still saved because of Amazon. I'm sure they've worked out, there are people like me who live in cities.
Shorful, I'm saved through Moonpig. Do you know how many times Moonpig saved my baby? It sends me push notifications to order my cards and stuff.
So I think, this is going back to the point of not just if you're collecting data, use it, okay? If suddenly post-pandemic, what you're noticing is that people are ordering on app, online, in store during their break times, okay? You don't have the traditional flow of commuters coming in the morning and the evening in suburban areas, whereas in sort of very high city centers, you get more of the break times and the lunch time. Adapt your working practices, okay? Introduce mechanisms that allow consumers to manage expectations. So, for example, let's take the McDonald's example, right? Okay, if loads of people came in and all the ordering, that kiosk is a digital kiosk. I never understand these about businesses. I mean, when I used to see digital displays that just were static brochures, I was like, you've got an internet-connected device and you're just treating it like a brochure, okay?
Don't get me started, Shorful. Don't get me started.
Yeah, we've only got 20 minutes left.
But if you think about the McDonald's, experience, right? That digital kiosk should say to you, look, if they are stretched, they've done the best planning they could, but you've turned up because there was a football game that finished at the same time. Everybody plowed into McDonald's. That kiosk should say, look, we're really sorry, but the waiting time for these items are more than 10 minutes. If you go for these items, actually, we can get them out to you in 5 minutes. And you know what? You've given customers a choice where they can't complain now, or if they do, they've been given an option not to complain because they're saying, if you change your preference, we can deliver you stuff more quicker than if we can't. And you will see that a lot of brands are now doing that. Automotive is a good example with the chip manufacturing shortage. They're pushing in stock. So they're saying, look, you'd have to wait 8 weeks, 12 weeks for your specifically designed car. Whereas if you're just willing to compromise on something, some of the features, we've got something in stock, you can have it within 2 weeks. And if you're not willing to wait, then, the brand has tried its best, to make you happy, try to make that experience happy. But also think about it, it's empowered the employee. It's given the employee experience to say to the employee, look, we are putting things in place to assist you with your role, and even if the brand can't staff up in such short notice, at least the technology should enable and augment what the staff can do. And so therefore the employees do feel that they're in control. They also feel that and I'm sure, James, in your line of business, if a train is delayed, giving employees autonomy to do certain things, I'm sure, makes the employee happy, let alone the customer. Like, for example, if a train is cancelled and first class is empty, just having the autonomy to move people to those would be a huge, a win for you guys.
Yeah, so with that example, I can provide two from an LNER perspective. One of them is when disruption does take place, which obviously is never good for anyone, right? Employees really don't like it because that's like the 50th time they've been in disruption potentially this year. And a customer definitely doesn't like it, but at least the customer is getting delay repay, so they're getting their money back. Whereas an employee might be stuck there in a really terrible scenario for hours, and they might not be able to get home to their kid's birthday party or whatever it might be. So, we've empowered our employees to be able to basically have like freebies to give out to customers when there's severe disruptions, like bottled water and brownies, that kind of stuff, just some stuff to reassure people. And something we launched, because it's very similar to that McDonald's example, something we launched during the pandemic was very employee and customer centric, which was around essentially delivery at sea of food and beverage when you're on board in standard class. So it's essentially delivery on board. So there was always something from a business case perspective, from a business view, that commercially this makes sense. But and customers have continuously told us time and time again that they don't want to leave their seat. If they're working, they don't want to get out of the zone, they don't want to take their stuff with them to the shop, they might not even know the shop exists, and they might have bought something before getting on board because of all of these factors. Now with employees, what we used to do is push trolleys through. And trolleys could be great in some scenarios. It's very easy, you push it, you don't need much training, it's quite simple. But from an employee perspective, they really don't like it. We spoke to them, and these trolleys are big trolleys. When you're traveling 125 miles an hour and doing 25-degree tilt, it's really worrying, and you have to get through the carriages, and then people get on the train, you get stuck there, you're in the way. So we spoke to them, and they told us that actually preparing everything in the safety of like the kitchen, and then being able to just take it through to the person and giving them the ability is really important. Again, employees told us that they were really worried because during COVID, obviously our passenger numbers were down. They're massively up now. So when you get trains with high loading, so really high capacity, how are you going to basically fulfill orders for maybe 100 that come in at the same time if there's a football game? And again, we built something in the system from an employee perspective which enables them to pause a service and then displays a message to customers saying, sorry, we're a bit snowed under, but if you check in 10 minutes or come to the shop and we'll serve you there, it's in coach C. Then that's how we go about it. And again, we wouldn't have been able to come to that without a holistic vision of both the employee and the customer, and then obviously the business at the heart of it too.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think we all experience service propositions like that. Over lockdown with all the QR codes in restaurant tables and apps, and maybe some restaurants weren't sort of geared up enough to deal with kind of that way of ordering as well. So it is really interesting. I wanted to spend the last just under sort of 10 minutes really, as we've had a few questions submitted, if that's okay. First of all, we've had one through from LinkedIn asking about sort of what kind of data should you be looking at to sort of show that you're listening to customers and informing the conversations that they have with them. What's the sort of data people should be looking to work with there? Shorful, James, Yasmin, feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously apart from asking them directly with surveys and stuff that we could pop up, which may not be great for the consumer sometimes, it is literally, like I said, a lot of digital touch points can collect a lot of data. So every time a consumer or a customer does something with digital touch point, we are collecting data. So what you have to now decide is what is the type of data you want to know about. Okay, so for example, if you are creating, I'm just going to publishing, something I know is, do you create short pages? So articles that are short in pages. Or do you create one long article, right? Now, instead of asking, like, you can't always ask someone, did you prefer the short or the long? But you can build in tracking mechanisms to see, actually, if you put the short one in, how many people go more, and they scroll down and they keep reading, as opposed to people just bouncing off after reading the short. Or does the long one annoy people? It looks like a long page, takes time to load. Do you get a higher bounce rate? So what it's going back to that original point is, try to infer their intent and motivation from the way they behave. And that does require moving away from a very transactional view of data, saying, oh, it's ones and zeros, okay, to applying a more human element to it and a holistic element. And, you know, fortunately for me, I studied psychology. So one of the reasons I got into the data space is because every time I saw data, I always thought someone gave that data. No one, you know, that data doesn't just magically appear. So what we as specialists have got to do is work out what it is that the intent and the motivation behind that data is. And you know what, you won't get it all the time right, okay, but on the whole you will have a very good idea. But that then does go on to something I'd like to pick up with Yasmin, actually, is can we design experiences to collect better data? Because at the moment we rely on technology to collect better data, whereas we should be saying, okay, we want to know if people are satisfied, okay, how do we design the experience so that we can measure satisfaction?
And I think, Shorful, that is a great question. And the answer is absolutely yes. And what I find always surprising is that, you know, I remember, which, you know, you probably as well as 10, 15 years ago, I remember, you know, trying to do interesting things to capture data. At the time, it was like Facebook Connect and doing all this stuff. And people are so afraid of getting information, but, or that people wouldn't give information. People will give you information. They will give you all of their information. You'd be surprised. No matter, I mean, I've done testing where someone has literally said, you know, I don't give my information away. I don't like that. And then I'll give them an example of an experience that gets their information in a way that they might not recognize it, but it's quite valuable. And they're quite shocked. And, you know, I'll use an example of, for example, I don't know if you know Gnome. It's a kind of a personalized online dating, dieting program. And it's been one of the examples that I use quite a lot because it's shocking how much people provide just up front without even getting into the experience, you know, and when you go through the process, it's very simple questions, but some of them are very direct questions about your eating habits or your past eating habits and things that you would feel people are not comfortable sharing, but they do because a friend's told them, like, oh, this program's worked for me, or they've seen. So, you know, it's really interesting. And, you know, I think AI is going to be even more interesting in this aspect. So like, this might not be an example that's a more commercial example, but if you even look at the example Quick Draw, I think it's called, by Google, they are collecting around the world data around how people draw in different cultures. So, I mean, I've inputted it, you know, you just go in, you spend 5 minutes through, you know, every so often I even go in just to play with it, just to see how it's kind of expanded. It's been a project for over, I think, 3 or 4 years, maybe longer. But if you just look at something like that, and think about the playfulness and the creativity that you can use to leverage and learn from people. There's tons of things that we can do from the experience, but most clients and brands look at it from a questionnaire that says, how did you feel about this site?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, as much as those are useful in some cases, the only people that are filling those out are people that have pain points. They are not and so then you get this skew instead of actually learning about where you're doing the right thing and what the key moments are.
Thank you. No, thank you, Yasmin. And also, by the way, let's launch a dating app called Gnome. I think that would be fantastic. I don't know what the USP would be there. Perhaps people that wear big hats and like to fish by ponds. No, we've had a really interesting question submitted here, which I think could deal with we could deal with a whole hour, another hour to answer this, Yasmin. But April's asked a really good question here around how does one link, you know, CX across all channels in a complex business? How do you successfully join up the dots? And the answer can't be work with Tribal worldwide. Sorry, I'm the business development director. I had to say it.
So it's great. And there's, I mean, it is a longer answer because there's not just one thing that you can do, but I think that, you know, one of the things that's really interesting for lining up the CX across the multiple, first is when you get that data, making sure you get the right insights. And there are different ways to visually demonstrate that. You know, one example that we use a lot is we use experience maps. and they become very helpful when done correctly. So my team hears me talk about this all the time, but you know, most people, when they look at looking at experience maps, they're just looking to fill out what the framework is. And it's really a shame, because you really need to kind of look at the data that you've collected, collect the right data, collect the data that Shorful's talking about in regards to the behaviors and stuff, collect the data with co-creating with customers. But then that's one way that you can demonstrate all the insights and then take to your organization. And something like that is a tool that everybody can see that has been informed by data, has been informed by real customers, that then different parts of the organization can start to leverage different parts to have different initiatives to then influence the wider ecosystem versus just looking at one feature or one product.
Definitely. And I know that, you know, we've done a lot of work with that with other clients as well, with Volkswagen as an example, building really complex what we call conceptual models around, you know, how customers go through that car buying journey, which ultimately then forms that blueprint that everything hangs off of. And so, yeah, maybe Yasmin, as a follow-up to this, we have a whole other session on that for those that are interested. But you know, thanks for the question, April. One more question that's been submitted to me here. It was going to come up in a data webinar, I'm sure, full. Everyone's talking about cookieless. Everyone's talking about the shift from third-party data. Everybody's worried we're not going to have any data this time next year. Can we give anybody any reassurances as to what's happening there and some advice on what businesses can be doing now to plan for that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to bear in mind is that cookies was a technology that didn't exist before cookies were invented. Right now, they're not going to go away. It's just you won't be able to track across domains. So, you know, the big operating systems like iOS, Google, Android are blocking them, and even the browsers. But it doesn't mean that you won't be collecting data on your own assets or your own properties. So have a think about how you can maximize that. Okay. Yes. You know what, in some respects, it might be a good thing, because, you know, we've gone into the world where we don't really care anymore who the person is behind the content anymore. We just want to make sure they click and come through and do what we need them to do. So maybe in some respect, it will be a good thing. The second thing is you just have to work harder. You'd have to be more creative, more inventive around how you collect data. And going back to that point, maybe create experiences to collect that data. So, for example, if you're a brand that needs to differentiate between males and females landing on your website, okay, and you no longer have access to a DMP that will match up your cookie to tell you the probability of this person is a male or female, well, get creative now, okay? That's the whole point. The whole point is that when you come across these challenges and barriers, design experiences that will help you answer that question. And yes, you won't be 100% correct, but none of these technologies were ever 100% correct. We were happy to believe in them, okay? And the same thing will happen again. We'll be happy to believe that someone doing ABC makes them more likely to be a female than someone doing XYZ. And that's the way, you know, traditionally it's been. You know, we had TV programs, you know, that we knew skewed towards certain demographics and certain genders and age groups. And same with newspapers and magazines. That's why they have their different sections. They were never 100% correct, but on the whole, they attracted the right demographic. So I think, you know, yes, even though people call it cookieless, you still will have cookies. It's just that you won't be able to track across and be able to do all these third-party partnerships that made life very easy, but also spooky for the end customer, because they didn't know where you got their data from. So, you know, you have to be creative. C, you're now accountable. You collect that data. It's your data. You can't just palm it off and say, oh, I bought it from so-and-so. I'm just going to apologize now. You collect that data. That means in-house governance needs to be much better. It also means that the business now has to treat data as an asset. Okay. And this is where a lot of brands have been hands-on. They've outsourced this responsibility. They've decided that they're not in the data business, even though their digital touch points collecting so much data, they've sort of outsourced it. So yeah, so just to sum it up, I know we're running out of time, is essentially you can collect a lot of data on your own properties or your partner properties. Just work out the experiences that you need to design in order to get the data that you want.
I think just to add to that, I know, Jamie, you're probably sweating thinking, shit, we need to wrap this up quickly.
We've organically gone into our final thoughts. So that was Shorful. So yeah, add to that, James.
I just wanted to add to that. So one of the challenges that we have as an organisation at LNER, and this was the same at Avanti, sort of Virgin Trains across the board in rail, is sort of third-party bookings, and that could be anywhere in travel. It's increasingly becoming in hospitality too, and that kind of thing. So there's all this data which is being eaten up essentially by competitors, which means that we can't service our customers in a better way. We can't have a relationship with them and say, by the way, don't worry, we've got at-sea ordering. Don't bother getting that terrible meal deal from Boots. We'll get you something a lot nicer when you get on board our train. So what we've done to try to encourage that is to utilize our digital assets as sort of a foot in the door. We've done something which is really quite bold actually with our app and with our loyalty program. So I'm not going to go into too much depth, but with our loyalty program, essentially, if you've purchased a rail journey via Trainline or another third party, and then you bring that journey information over and create an account with us, we will give you £5 straight away, and we will also give you 2% back on your journey. So it's a value exchange, and we're being extremely honest about it, saying, look, we need this information to then better surface you and get you a better price, because if you book via Trainline, they're going to charge a commission. We're not going to charge a commission, and you're going to find out everything on board prior to getting on board, rather than when you're actually on board and you think, oh, damn it, I bought a sandwich. I shouldn't have bought a sandwich. There's something a lot better on board. So I think it's about being very, very honest and transparent with people around what you're going to be doing in this value exchange, because that's all it is. It's saying, okay, cool, yeah, give me this and I'll give you that in return. And you can make it fun, you can make it sexy, or you can make it very transactional, depending on what's appropriate at that moment in time.
Thanks, James. And Yasmin, I'll always happily overrun for you. You get the privilege of final thoughts before we close out.
So I think I'll just sum up a few things that I just think are important of what we talked about, but it's, let's use kind of CX and data to move away from these like passive and sameness and more to these responsive and adaptable experiences, and ones to people's needs. And then I think the other thing is that, we have to remember that people are multi-layered. Not every journey is ever going to meet every need, but if we actually understand the different needs of people, we'll be more inclusive, we'll think in different angles, and we'll also create new opportunities, I think, for new business models. And lastly, I just think, everybody that's listening, just make sure that CX biggest task that we have is finding the right problem to solve for. And we can't do that without data, but it's also with the right data. So it's just make sure that you investigate and you gather insights, but you do it throughout the entire customer journey. And I think James mentioned this a few times, but it's so important. Like if you are only looking at this, you're only going to solve this. And to be honest, you're only going to fix a problem. You're not actually going to solve anything. But if you look at the broader picture and you look at what's happening to customers before they come there, and you just look at their connections and interactions, you're going to solve that problem and perhaps a lot of other things. So yes, I'll just leave it at that.
No, look, that's great. I always knew we were going to overrun on this webinar because we had so much to get through, and we still didn't get through everything. But look, thank you everyone for joining. I know it's been a really sort of fast-paced hour. We've covered a lot of ground. So, look, if anything has sparked any interest, please do reach out to myself, and we can schedule a more one-on-one to pick up on anything that you felt we maybe sort of skimmed over. And we can talk more in context of your own business as well. We here at Tribal always love connecting with new clients. And, some final thoughts from me, just, look out for our next webinar that will be coming up as well. We're going to be running these much more regularly this year. Do look out for the recording of this as well, so that you can access that, share it with your colleagues and everything as well. Thank you for everyone for joining today. We look forward to welcoming you back soon.